A secret agreement was signed inside the royal palace of Dubai, an agreement so powerful it could shift the entire future of the monarchy. But what if I told you the one person who should have known everything knew nothing, while Sheikh Hamdan, the beloved crown prince, believed things were finally calming down in his chaotic personal life, others were moving in silence. Behind the palace walls, loyalties were shifting, power was being negotiated, and a shocking plan was being set in motion. At the center of it all, his wife, Sheikha Thani, and a demand that would send shockwaves through the royal family. But how did we get here? And why is everyone staying so quiet? Let's go back to the moment the storm began. It started like any other disagreement, but it didn't end that way. Inside the palace walls, voices were raised, not just between Sheikh Hamdan and Sheikha Thani, but with someone far more powerful, Sheikh Mohammed, the ruler of Dubai and Hamdan's father. What began as a personal issue turned into a full-blown royal crisis. Sheikh Hamdan, known for his calm and level-headed nature, tried to keep things from escalating, but Sheikha Thani wasn't backing down. Her tone grew sharper, her frustration heavier. She wasn't arguing to be heard, she was demanding change. And then, in a moment that stunned the palace staff, Sheikha Thani walked out. No guards, no royal procession, just silence and determination. She returned to her father's house, not to retreat, but to regroup. Because this time, she wasn't done. She was just getting started. Back at her father's estate, Sheikha Thani wasn't sulking or second-guessing her decision. She was planning. In a private, late-night conversation with her father, she laid out something bold, something that would tilt the royal scales in her favor. She didn't just want reconciliation. She wanted security, legacy, power. She wanted her son, little Mohammed, to be named the next crown prince of Dubai, not someday, not maybe, now, and she wanted it in writing. Her father, a seasoned figure with deep ties in the royal network, instantly understood what this meant. If his grandson was legally promised the throne, their entire branch of the family would rise in influence forever. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a political maneuver, and he was all in. It didn't take long. Within days, Sheikha Thani's father picked up the phone and called the one man who had the power to grant or deny the crown, Sheikh Mohammed. On the surface, the call was calm, almost diplomatic, but beneath the polite words, there was a clear agenda. He brought up the recent argument, voiced his concern for his daughter's well-being, and then, casually but deliberately, slipped in the real reason for the call. He suggested that the best way to restore peace in the palace was to legally name little Mohammed as the next crown prince. The line went quiet. Sheikh Mohammed didn't explode. He didn't argue. But make no mistake, he was livid. Not because he didn't care for his grandson, but because this wasn't a request. It was a challenge, a direct hit to his authority as ruler, and a move that signaled someone else was trying to write the future of Dubai behind his back. He ended the call with a cold promise, "I'll consider it." But inside he knew things would never be the same again. For Sheikh Mohammed, this wasn't just a family issue anymore. It was a threat to his legacy. He found himself torn between two visions of the future. On one side was Sheikha Thani, royal by blood, powerful in her own right, and now backed by a father who clearly wasn't afraid to play the game. On the other side was Shamma, once overlooked, now quietly becoming the emotional center of Sheikh Hamdan's life. Shamma wasn't from the core bloodline, but she offered something the others didn't, genuine connection. And Sheikh Hamdan, already exhausted by the royal politics and expectations, had found peace with her. But Sheikh Mohammed didn't care about peace. He cared about power, lineage, and legacy. In a private, closed-door conversation, Sheikh Mohammed made a stunning demand. He told Sheikh Hamdan to walk away from Shamma completely, not later, now. He wanted his son to recommit fully to Sheikha Thani, not just emotionally. He demanded another child, a second baby boy, naturally. No surrogates, no exceptions. The order was clear, but Sheikh Hamdan's reaction was anything but obedient. For a moment, Sheikh Hamdan just sat there, silent, stunned. The man who had guided his life, shaped his future, and ruled an entire nation had just demanded he give up the one person who made him feel free. And for what? To serve a legacy he no longer believed in? Hamdan didn't raise his voice, he didn't lash out, but when he finally spoke, his words cut through the silence like a blade. No, he wasn't going to abandon Shamma, and he wasn't going to force another child into a family, dynamic, already fractured by secrets and manipulation. Sheikh Mohammed was speechless. No one ever told him no, not like this. For the first time in decades, his grip on the royal narrative slipped. The crown prince had defied him, and now he had no idea what would happen next. But Sheikh Mohammed wasn't ready to surrender, not yet. With Sheikh Hamdan refusing to bend, Sheikh Mohammed turned to his last resort, negotiation. In a discreet meeting with Sheikha Thani and her father, he laid out a new offer. It wasn't emotional, it wasn't personal, it was transactional. If Sheikha Thani agrees to have a second baby boy through surrogacy and returns to the palace without further conflict, he said, I will sign a written agreement naming little Mohammed as the next crown prince. It was a shocking concession from a man known for never backing down. But Thani's father saw it for what it was, victory. Still, he pushed for more. Double her allowance, he said, then we have a deal. Sheikh Mohammed hesitated, but only for a moment. He needed this chaos to end. He agreed, but he added one condition, firm and absolute. Sheikh Hamdan must never know. The deal was struck, a silent agreement, sealed behind closed doors, a document that would shape Dubai's future, signed without the crown prince even knowing it existed, and just like that, the power shifted. Sheikha Thani returned to the palace, but she wasn't the same woman who had stormed out. Gone were the fiery arguments, the bold demands, the emotional outbursts. In their place was quiet, composed, calculated. She moved through the halls like a queen already assured of her crown, not for herself, but for her son. Sheikh Mohammed said nothing about the deal, not to his advisors, not to his son, not even to those closest to him. He watched, he waited, and for the first time in weeks, the palace was calm. Sheikh Hamdan noticed the shift instantly. The tension was gone, but something didn't feel right. Thani's sudden silence, her almost eerie politeness, it didn't feel like peace, it felt like strategy. But Hamdan, craving stability, convinced himself that maybe, just maybe, the storm had passed. He had no idea a storm was still raging. He just couldn't see it yet. With the palace finally quiet, Sheikh Hamdan allowed himself to hope again. He believed Sheikha Thani had let go of the past, that maybe, after everything, they could all move forward. And in that fragile calm, he turned back to the one person who had always made him feel seen, Shamma. She had stayed quiet through the drama, never pushed, never demanded. She simply waited. And to Hamdan, that silence meant loyalty, love, a second chance. He began to believe that with the chaos fading, he could finally build something real with her, outside of royal games and political pressure. But what he didn't know was that the game hadn't ended. It had just gone underground. A deal had already been signed. A future had already been promised. And Shamma? She wasn't in it. She was walking into a palace where the crown had already been handed to someone else, quietly, secretly, and without her knowledge. And the worst part? Hamdan still had no idea. In a palace built on tradition and control, the real power had quietly changed hands. Sheikha Thani didn't need to shout anymore. She had what she came for, a written promise, a future locked in, a second child on the way, and most importantly, silence working in her favor. Her father now held leverage. Sheikh Mohammed had bent something no one thought possible, and even though he still wore the crown, a piece of his authority had been signed away behind closed doors. Sheikh Hamdan, still unaware, continued on, believing peace had returned. He spent more time with Shamma, thinking the worst was behind them, but nothing was behind them. It was all unfolding beneath their feet. Thani's silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. Her return wasn't reconciliation, it was victory. And while everyone else was finally exhaling, she was already 2 moves ahead. Because now she didn't just want peace, she wanted permanence. And this time she had the paper to prove it.